Think you're an animal person? We don't mean that you like cute videos or occasionally rescue a stray. What if the law itself agrees with you? Today we're going to prove, by way of the most baffling local ordinances and historical relics, that you secretly prefer animals over humans. These are not personality tests, they are receipts. Each of the next 50 little legal oddities is a sign. You pick paws, beaks, and fur over small talk, social drama, and human nonsense. Ready? Let's start checking your animal loyalty on a scale of 1 to howl. 1. You'd rather let animals decide your footwear rules. Carmel, California's high heel permit shows you think common sense shouldn't be a human-only privilege. There was famously a requirement in Carmel, reportedly, that women obtain a permit to wear heels over 2 inches on certain streets, bureaucracy policing how people walk. If your instinct is to blame the cobblestones and prefer a calm animal shuffle to human runway strutting, you hear the animal logic. Just walk comfortably. Qualify. That rule has been discussed as a local ordinance and is often brought up to mock overregulation. 2. You prefer finger-licking authenticity. In Gainesville, Georgia, there's an oft-cited ordinance about eating fried chicken with your hands that feels like a tiny law in favor of honest, messy pleasure. If your ideal dinner involves no napkins, no pretense, and a dog eyeing your plate like a critic, you clearly pick the animal-friendly approach to grub. Whatever tastes best, do it. Also, if you insist on communal loafing and lip-smocking, you're basically voting for the animal kingdom's culinary code. 3. You'd rather wear a playful alias than host human drama. When legal tech language and how folks read things like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act turns pseudonyms into a legal headache, we're reminded that animals get to go by simple names, and no one sues the cat. People litigate about fake profiles. Your preference is clear if you'd rather be Mr. Whiskers and avoid the human mess of identity policing. Animals get called names, answer to them, and don't have to explain their online behavior in court. 4. You prefer to be labeled loitering while contemplating a tree than stuck in forced small talk. Minnesota's broad anti-loitering type statutes make hanging out suspicious, whereas animals can sit and stare all day with no social consequences. If you think pondering a patch of grass beats pretending to network, you choose the animal agenda. Presence beats performance. That's a sign you fall on the side of quiet observation, not human networking elbowing. 5. You gossip less than the law allows. Oklahoma's wiretapping and eavesdropping statutes are oddly specific about listening, which makes you admire animals' discretion. Dogs bark, owls hoot, but there's no rumor mill.
If your instinct is to keep secrets for the good of the pack rather than broadcast drama, you align with animal ethics. Fewer leaks, more loyalty. Also, animals are literal about boundaries. No recording devices, no betrayal. You share passwords with her pack. Tennessee has criminalized certain kinds of password sharing in the streaming era, but you look at your household like a den everyone should be able to enter. If your instinct is to share your streaming account with roommates and the cot sleeps across the remote, you value communal warmth over human contractual hair splitting. In other words, you trust your fur family more than the corporate terms of service. You'd prefer a snowball to a social fight. Aspen, Colorado reportedly has a ban on snowball throwing in some situations, which is the kind of ordinance that criminalizes playful chaos. If you'd rather fling a harmless, cold missile than escalate to a human shouting match, congratulations, you pick the animal version of play fighting, short, physical, and with no press releases. Snowball fights are democratic and brief. Human grudges are not. You'd tuck a donkey into a bathtub. The legend of a donkey stuck in a bathtub in Arizona, and the resulting ordinance and rescue stories, tells us you sympathize with creature comforts more than human logic. If your immediate reaction is to help an awkward animal into a safer configuration rather than call a committee, you prioritize living beings over protocol. Animals get simple needs met. Humans invent forms and delays. You favor cowboy authenticity over urban pretense. That quirky local law in BL, California about cowboy boots, as cited in local lore, reads like a demand that you be real about who you are and what animals you work with. If you'd rather live with the practical dignity of livestock boots than the performative gloss of urban style, you prefer animal utility over human image maintenance. Animals don't put on airs, they show up with purpose. You'd blindfold yourself for play, not to impress. Alabama's ban on driving blindfolded is a reminder that some human stunts get legal pushback, whereas animals can engage in risky play and it just looks natural. If you'd rather close your eyes and romp with the dogs in the backyard than stage a dangerous spectacle for social media likes, your priorities are low drama and high joy, classic animal preference. If that hit home and you'd rather cuddle a dog than argue with a stranger online, do us a favor, like, and subscribe so the algorithm knows where the sensible creatures live. You'd give Bigfoot a break. Some Washington counties have ordinances jokingly protecting Bigfoot from harassment, or at least have used the idea in local publicity. And if your instinct is to let cryptids roam in peace, you pick creatures of mystery over paparazzi culture.
Whether it's tongue-in-cheek or a statement about respecting the unknown, you appreciate the animal rights vibe extended to mythical beasts. You prefer the idea of silent coexistence to exploitative exposure. You hum quietly like a cat. North Carolina's odd local rules about off-key public singing, reported in some towns, make you grateful that animals don't get fined for being tone-deaf. If you prefer to purr under your breath than audition for a human audience, that's a sign. You value private contentment over theatrical performance. Animals' songs are their own. Humans insist on critique. You'd rather own a boat than a lawn ornament. Certain Hawaiian neighborhood bylaws that historically required practical watercraft ownership or regulated coastal lots read like a preference for real function over human decorative posturing. If your fantasy is a life of drifting with your pet at your side rather than maintaining an Instagrammable yard, you lean into an animal lifestyle, mobile, simple, and focused on needs. Boats hold dogs, don't hold grudges. You accept common law companionship like a bonded animal pack. New Hampshire's old common law marriage recognition, in some context after long cohabitation, resembles animal pair bonding, years of living together creating rights and responsibilities without legal fanfare. If you believe long shared routines should count for something, you admire the animal model of implicit commitment over contractual romance. Animals form packs and stick together. Some humans pretend commitment is a brand. You'd rather protect camels like old herd animals. Arizona's historical ban on hunting camels is tied to the 19th century U.S. Army experiment with camels in the Southwest. Those animals were veterans of a peculiar time and in many places later treated as oddities. If your reaction is to guard a displaced camel's memory rather than celebrate its removal, you pick compassion for creatures associated with human folly. Historically, camels were brought for desert logistics in the 1850s, and the prohibition against hunting them, in the sense of protecting non-native fauna, reflects a weird mixture of respect and impracticality, exactly the kind of thing that makes you side with animals over human short-term thinking. You'd make exits without screeching tires. A small Kansas town's ban on excessive tire squealing reads like a law that prefers quiet like a sleeping dog. If you'd rather slip away like a fox than announce yourself with showy combustion, your social aesthetic is creaturely discretion. Animals exit gracefully or invisibly. Humans have to make a scene. You hate exclusion. Chicago's historical ugly laws, which criminalized public appearance for people with physical disabilities, are not a joke and must be condemned as a dark chapter of civic cruelty. If your first instinct is to advocate for the shunned, to prefer the company of beings who are accepted without cosmetic policing, you choose animals' simple presence over human systems that weaponized appearance. Those laws reflect a time when cities literally fined people for existing visibly differently. We mention it to underline that preferring animals is, at its best, a preference for compassion and against human cruelty. You prefer real butter over human fakery. Wisconsin's old rules about dairy labeling and how margarine was regulated suggest you value honest taste and transparent food production. If you reach for the stick of butter like an animal choosing the most nourishing bite, you value authenticity over manufactured substitutes. Animals eat what nourishes. Humans get lost in labeling wars. You hang your lights for the neighborhood or the wildlife. Maine towns that have rules on holiday light display durations are proof you prefer tidy, considerate ritual. Imagine choosing a schedule that respects migrating birds and neighbors. If you're the person who takes lights down on time so the owls don't get confused, you clearly prioritize animal-friendly community behavior over sloppy human indulgence. Animals appreciate routine. Humans sometimes narcissistically extend festivities into nuisance. You don't milk strangers' cows. In Texas, laws about milking someone else's cow without permission are wonderfully old-fashioned reminders that animals are individuals with owners and boundaries. If your instinct is to respect another farmer's horned coworker rather than help yourself, you're operating on an animal respect code. Don't take what isn't yours, especially if it moves. This is the opposite of exploitative human entitlement. You doodle on money, but don't start a heist.
Defacing currency is federally regulated, but the urge to scribble a grin or a mustache on a bill demonstrates an animalistic impulse to mark territory playfully rather than to orchestrate grand theft. If your favorite rebellious act is doodling and leaving things very animal, very cute. Animals mark territory with scent. Humans use ink and questionable art. You'd take a lion to the movies in your head. Baltimore's historical ordinances about bringing dangerous animals into cinemas, used as a colorful local example, reveal how we dream of animals as companions even where human etiquette forbids them. If you'd rather cuddle a lion in the back row than be elbowed by screaming theatergoers, you trust the calming presence of another creature over human patience. In practice, bringing a big cat to a film is terrible, but fantasizing about animal co-viewers says a lot about your priorities.
You prefer calm crowds to cursing mobs. Massachusetts towns that frowned on cursing at players or creating public disturbances suggest you admire an animal-scale decorum, a stadium full of dignified gazelles rather than heckling hyenas. If you want sportsmanship and quiet pride, not human mob theatrics, you're on Team Creature. Animals respect hierarchy without the slanderous microphones. You don't wake a sleeping bear for a selfie. Alaska reportedly has statutes discouraging or forbidding intentionally disturbing wildlife for photographs, which is a principle you can get behind fast. If you prefer letting a bear snooze and watching from a safe, respectful distance rather than chasing likes, your ethos is animal protective and patient. Historically, as human tourism encroached on wild territories, laws like this developed to stop exploitative and dangerous behavior. Choosing animals' well-being over human vanity is a telling sign. You let attendants pump your gas and watch the critters. New Jersey's long-standing prohibition on self-service gas pumping, still in effect statewide, makes many of us passively nostalgic for a time when someone else handled the mechanical inconvenience. If you enjoy being waited on so you can observe parking lot pigeons and pet owners, you prefer the leisurely animal-watching life to human chore hustle. Some of us are content to be observers in the ecosystem rather than drivers of all the systems. You don't walk backward while eating. A tiny Oregon town's outlawing of walking backward down the street while eating a donut, as cited in local lore, displays the sort of specificity that makes animals look rational in comparison. If you'd rather eat your donut in place with dignity like a raccoon at a trash can than perform physical stunts to impress strangers, that's a sign you prefer animal-style contentment to human showmanship. Simplicity beats spectacle. You skip the used underwear car wash. San Francisco had strange ordinances limiting what sorts of second-hand intimate item businesses can operate. If your standard for shared sanitation is more animal-level common sense, keep it clean and obvious, you lean animal. Animals have clear boundaries about soiled items. Humans complicate them with euphemism. You prefer giant chocolate gestures. Idaho's old-sounding rules about chocolate weight or packaging in novelty contexts, as sometimes cited, suggest you favor over-the-top indulgence instead of the fussy, tasteful tiny treat. If your idea of romance is a towering slob of chocolate and a dog licking the wrapper, you're prioritizing sensory delight over human boutique minimalism. Animals go big when hungry. Humans often undercommit. You'd pay the meter for an elephant. In some circus history towns in Florida and elsewhere, there's a charming historical anecdote about elephants parking at meters and whether ringmasters had to pay. If your instinct is to include large animals in urban logistics, literally feeding coins for pachyderm parking, you imagine a civic life for animals are part of the municipal plan. Historically, traveling circuses did bring elephants into cities, and some places adopted municipal responses. Your sympathy for an elephant's right to a legal parking spot is the purest sign you prefer animals over human convenience. You don't let ferrets do your hunting. West Virginia's restrictions or debates around using ferrets for hunting reflect concerns about fair chase and species-appropriate methods. If you side with clear rules that treat animals as partners rather than tools, you prefer ethical animal companionship over human shortcutting. That kind of conscientiousness, respecting a creature's role rather than exploiting it, is unmistakably pro-animal. You won't throw a beach party on Sunday. South Carolina's old ordinances about Sunday decorum, including limits on certain public entertainments, read like someone tried to legislate the quiet hours for the birds. If your instinct when the surface calm is to sit and watch the sandpipers rather than crank a speaker and start a rager, you choose animal-style respect for shared spaces. Animals don't host drum circles at dawn. They migrate, they roost, they keep to rhythms that benefit the whole ecosystem. So if you'd rather preserve a shoreline for nesting plovers than stage a human soundtrack, congratulations. You prefer the long view of
creaturely neighborhoods over our tendency to treat public space like a personal stage. You wouldn't soak a trolley with pickle juice. That Rhode Island ordinance about not throwing things, including the delightfully specific pickle juice, at trolleys is a reminder animals don't weaponize their environment for petty thrills. If you look at public transit and think, let's not graffiti the rails with condiments, you're operating on a code animals implicitly follow. Habitats are for living, not for stunts. There's also a tiny moral here about empathy. A trolley is a working animal of the city, hauling people and their dogs, and you treating it with respect is basically saying you put the urban ecosystem ahead of adolescent mischief. Prefer an orderly commute where ducks can cross the tracks in peace. That's a sign. You recoil at archaic cruelty laws. Some archaic statutes, historically and reportedly alleged in places like Arkansas, described grotesque allowances for domestic violence. These are not a punchline and must be named for what they are, shameful remnants of a brutal past. If your immediate reaction to hearing about such laws is moral outrage and a desire to protect the vulnerable, you line up with animals' moral simplicity. They don't legislate cruelty. They respond to it with avoidance or defense, not rationalization.
We mention this because preferring animals over people, at its best, means rejecting systems that normalized harm and choosing compassion over complacency. That kind of preference isn't sentimental. It's a refusal to let human institutions normalize abuse. You avoid spectacle that endangers others. Utah's broad, oddly worded catastrophe statutes, which can sweep in a lot of dramatic but reckless behavior, make you think twice before staging a viral stunt. Animals tend to avoid putting the whole herd at risk for a single individual's thrill. If you similarly balk at stunts that could harm strangers, infrastructure, or wildlife, you prefer a communal ethic animals accidentally model. It's not Puritanism, it's pragmatic. A flock doesn't try to set the barn on fire for likes. So if your instinct is to protect rather than perform, you pick the animal tribe over the internet circus. You prefer a short boating sabbatical over permanent hoarding. Georgia's rules about living full-time on a boat or caps on transient nuzzle residency show a tension between mobility and municipal order. If you romanticize drifting with your dog, moving with the tides and letting the scenery change rather than anchoring possessions and ego ashore, you're aligning with animal migratory logic. Many creatures move seasonally because it's adoptive. People who want to live lightly on the water often do it to be closer to nature and less attached to possessions. So if you'd rather wake up to gull calls than mow the same lawn forever, yes, you're choosing an animal-friendly way of life. You'd cosplay alone. Historically, New York's anti-mask laws, like those from the 19th century intended to curb riots, make someone who prefers to avoid group theatrics look sane. Animals don't dress up to deceive each other. Displays are direct and honest. If you prefer to be the weirdo wearing a fur hat on your own terms in the park rather than joining a masked mob, you're signaling a comfort with solitary authenticity that animals often exhibit. Lone wolves or content felines, you know what you're rooting for. You don't nop on the cheese factory conveyor belt. South Dakota's quirky ban on sleeping in certain industrial spaces reads like a rule born of common sense. Production lines are for production, not lounging. If your instincts are to keep sleeping for warmth and safety in proper dens, or the couch at home, rather than choosing dangerous novelty napping, you're following the animal logic of safety first. Animals don't take industrial risks for a nap. They burrow where it's secure. So preferring secure creature comfort naps over human stunt napping, another paw raised for team animal. You wouldn't x-ray for shoe sizes. Nevada's prohibition on using x-ray shoe fitting machines, historically motivated by health concerns, is the sort of regulation that suggests humans sometimes invent creepy technological shortcuts.
If your shopping vibe is, let's try them on the old-fashioned way, and you recoil at the idea of irradiating body parts for footwear stats, you prefer non-invasive tactile methods, like an animal settling into its fur to assess fit. Animals don't need devices to know comfort. They wiggle and settle. That instinct to choose natural feedback over invasive tech is quietly animalistic. You'd only sell dyed ducklings if you ran a respectable business. Kentucky's rules about dyeing and selling ducklings, with limits and conditions, come from a complicated place, a mix of public health, animal welfare concerns, and a cultural history of novelty farm animal trade. If your reaction to the idea of neon ducklings is, we should ensure transparency, humane treatment, and disclaimers, you're treating these animals like beings, not props. Historically, dyed ducklings became a fad in pet stores and county fairs, and regulators stepped in where commercialization risked cruelty. Choosing careful stewardship over exploitative spectacle shows you prefer animals' welfare to human novelty-driven profit. You don't sell your own eyeball. Texas's law against selling one's eye, a colorful statutory prohibition, is actually a threshold question about bodily commodification. If you instinctively feel that organs and body parts shouldn't be market commodities, that some things belong to the living before they belong to the ledger, you're adopting an ethic animals demonstrate by virtue of living. Bodies are not trade goods. Animals are neither vendors nor consumers of bodily parts. They survive and reproduce, and their integrity matters. So if you'd rather preserve your physical wholeness to keep petting more dogs than monetize your cornea, you side with creaturely dignity over human commerce. You wouldn't puff a cigar to your cat. Illinois statutes against giving animals dangerous substances, like lit cigars, underline a basic moral we can all endorse. Don't expose creatures to human vices. If your first thought in a bar is, nope, don't let the animal inhale, you're prioritizing their health in a way many humans neglect. Animals don't choose to be around smoke, and they certainly can't consent to being part of human bad habits. Choosing to protect animals from our worst impulses is a big concrete sign you prefer their well-being to humanly induced theatrics. You don't spread false alarms. Oregon statutes about false reports or disseminating news intended to cause panic capture an interesting parallel to animal communication. They warn against dishonest alarm calling that wastes resources and endangers others. If you would rather be the calm member of the group who signals accurately, like a bird whose alarm call is meaningful, than someone who fabricates crises for clicks, you model animal honesty. Animals have evolved to use signals sparingly because false alarms can be fatal. People forget that.
So if truthfulness in public life matters more to you than rhetorical performance, that's a furry handshake right there. You don't freeload Wi-Fi like a raccoon scavenging. Michigan case interpretations that treat tampering with utility infrastructure to include theft of service, yes, even internet, make freeloading into a civic misbehavior. If you prefer honest sharing, like a cooperative meerkat watch party, rather than sneaky piggybacking off a neighbor's bandwidth, you're showing communal ethics animals show within a pack. Raccoons are clever scavengers, but a domesticated life thrives on predictable resource distribution. If you'd rather put in the subscription than skulk the back porch, you value order and fairness over clever theft. You don't camp out in the middle of the street. Eureka, California's ordinance against sleeping on public streets is the kind of municipal rule meant to keep streets possible and safe. If your preferred approach to rest is to find a sheltered den, park bench, or humane shelter, rather than claim the middle of a thoroughfare, you're favoring animal instincts for safe nesting sites. Animals don't sleep where they'll be trampled. They seek concealment and protection. Choosing that safer, quieter resting approach over theatrical public occupation is another sign you're more aligned with animal logic than with human spectacle. You don't pizza bomb strangers. Louisiana's laws around prank deliveries and related statutes addressing harassment suggest that violating someone's private space with food for laughs is not harmless comedy. If your sense of humor includes respecting boundaries, no surprise pies at the doorstep unless invited, you prefer predictable routines animals rely on. Dogs and cats thrive on mealtimes. Random pizza drops upend someone's schedule and possibly their pet's diet. So if you'd rather not be the person who messes with someone's dinner window, you're choosing creaturely rhythm over human prank culture. You seal your snory emitters. Massachusetts and other locales historically having nuisance rules that reach into night noises means considerate sleepers and their roommates get social credit. If you take actions to ensure your snoring doesn't disturb neighbors or move to a den better suited for noisy nights, you align with animal consideration for the pack. Animals modulate their sounds for survival and social harmony. Humans often weaponize noise. Choosing quiet for community peace is another small but telling animal-preferring habit. You avoid faux prophecy scams. Maryland's patchwork on fortune-telling licensing and restrictions reflects a civic desire to curb psychic scams without outlawing harmless entertainment. If you prefer the present-moment evidence-based companionship of a pet to the promises of a charlatan, you trust the animal's straightforwardness over human theatrical mysticism. Pets live in the now. They don't sell futures. Preferring honest co-presence to fortunes for fee is very much an animal-aligned value. You keep your pants up for the critters. Municipal saggy pants ordinances in places like parts of Florida and Louisiana might seem petty, but if your tendency is to dress in ways that don't embarrass your dog or partner in public, you're prioritizing dignity that benefits your social animals. Animals don't flaunt clothing, thankfully, but they do avoid behaviors that scream vulnerability to predators. Consider sagging as a human equivalent of telling the world you're not prepared.
Choosing to present yourself with a baseline of respect for the community and the animals that share it is yet another Paws signal. You don't leap from moving cars. Glendale, California's ban on dangerous stunts like jumping from a vehicle at high speed is municipal common sense dressed up as ordinance. If your instinct is to keep your limbs intact so you can run with your dog later, that practical, body-preserving attitude leans animal. We invest in longevity to care for packs, not short, dangerous bursts for a video. Animals don't do viral jumps for social currency. They conserve themselves to nurture, hunt, and cuddle another day. So if you protect your body for future petting sessions, you're on Team Fur. You'd let mustaches steal kisses from animals. Iowa's quirky old-time restrictions on public displays of affection or minute-length limits on certain acts, the folklore of a 5-minute public kiss rule, and similarly specific moral ordinances are the sort of human obsession with regulating intimacy that makes animals look delightfully unbothered. If your heart lights up more at a slobbery dog kiss than a bureaucratically timed human smooch, then this is the clincher. Animals keep affection honest and unmetered. They don't negotiate consent forms for a nuzzle. They just lean in, sincere and uncomplicated. That, more than anything, proves the thesis. If you trade a socially scrutinized human smooch for a warm animal nuzzle any day, you prefer Paws to protocols. And now, the award for the most revealing sign. Drum roll, please, but mute it because we respect the birds, goes to sign 29, the elephant at the meter anecdote. Think about it. A pachyderm in an urban spot forced the city to reconcile municipal procedure with an animal's size and needs. The image of a ringmaster trying to feed a parking meter for an elephant, historically tied to traveling circuses and small-town adaptations, captures everything about our weird civic life. Humans create rules for their convenience and then have to retrofit them to include those beings they brought into the picture. If you sympathize with the pachyderm, wish the meter accepted peanuts, or that the town had a municipal pachyderm exemption, you aren't being sentimental. You're noting that animals simplify moral calculus. They need shelter, food, dignity. People, meanwhile, invent fines and forms.
Preferring the elephant's straightforward plight to bureaucratic hair-splitting is the purest sign that animals win your heart over human procedure. So where does that leave us? If you laughed, groaned, or felt a little guilty after more than a few of these items, you're officially closer to a person who prefers the honest company of animals over the messy theater of human life. That preference can be compassionate, political, practical, or all of the above. You might love animals because they center you, because they make you kinder, or simply because they don't make you fill out 12 forms before a cuddle. Which of these 50 signs is totally you? Drop the number in the comments and tell us the story. Did you ever refuse to pay a meter for a pet, hypothetically? Or are you the kind of person who takes lights down on time because the owls need it? We want the receipts. If you enjoyed this little legal safari and want more lists that make the world seem equal parts silly and sincere, subscribe and stick around. Your next animal ally might just be a law away.